The British government, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, swiftly dispatched a British military task force to retake the islands. There was to be no room for doubters in the ranks.
Do you remember what Queen Victoria once said? Failure? The possibilities do not exist.
At the same time, a top-secret unit in Buckinghamshire was coming up with its own plan to help win back the Falklands. Latimer House was then the home of the British Army Psychological Warfare Unit, and they were cooking up a plan. Their Special Operations Group called the plan Project MoonShine. The men from the ministry needed an expert to run the project, and they were tipped off by MI6 that Neil French Blake was the man for the job.
I was confronted with a special operations group who were designed to find unconventional warfare methods to defeat the Argentinians.
As my university colleague Jeff Hulbert photographed all the papers in Neil French Blake's filing cabinet, we found a secret document which lists the people who were involved in Project MoonShine. From the day we first set foot in Neil's apartment in 2013, it took us 8 years to track down the people on the list.
Hi, Jeff.
Some had died. Some were reluctant to talk because of the official Secrets Act. But after a lot of detective work, we finally found 3 people who the Ministry of Defence agreed could talk to us. A former RAF technician, but then was a civilian in 1982, Jim Warwick. Another civilian, David Addis. And Major Terence Scott of the 14th 20th King's Hussars. As the Falklands were being invaded, Major Terence Scott was just returning from a posting.
I had just finished a tour commanding a squadron, in a tank squadron. The regiment was in Germany at the time, and just starting at a staff job in this country, in England.
Talk us how you got this message that you were required.
I was on a course with the Intelligence Corps Centre in Ashford as part of the preparation for my next job, when the door opened, a chap came in, muttered something quietly to whoever was instructing us, and then came over to me and said, go pack your bag, we're off to London tonight. And so I asked him on the way what was up, and he said, I don't really know, but we've just been told to get you to London tonight. So I went.
Meanwhile, Neil French Blake contacted Jim Warwick. Jim was a radio engineer at Hereward Radio in Peterborough, but he used to work at Neil's former station, Radio 210.
I got a call from Neil French Blake, who said, I want you to come to London. You're to come down to London now. All right.
And what did you think you were going to do once you got to London?
I didn't know. Neil was very vague. It was something to do with studios, and that was all I knew.
Did you know it was to do with the Falklands War?
No, but I had a reasonable guess.
At the time, David Addis was the programme controller at Radio 210 in Reading. He didn't get a call from Neil French Blake, he got a personal visit.
Neil came round to my house, and I remember him asking me if I was patriotic, a typical kind of question, which I said I was, yes, why not? Neil said to me, you will go to the managing director, Tony Stoller, and ask him for time off, and he will say yes. I don't even think I said, is it okay? I said, I think I'm going. And he sort of looked mystified and said, okay. So I then, the following day, went up to London with Neil, 7 o'clock in the morning.
The reason the top brass was so interested in Major Scott was that he was born in Chile. His family has long-standing links there, and he was fluent in the South American version of Spanish.
I was taken straight into some building, I suspect it must have been the Ministry of Defence, for an interview, and they were testing my Spanish. And when I asked what it was for, they said, you don't need to know that yet, we'll tell you at the end of the interview if you pass, which apparently I did.
And at this point, Terence's superiors were able to tell him, and Jim and David, what was behind all the cloak and dagger activities, and what the psychological warfare Project MoonShine was to become. With their help, the British were going to launch a propaganda radio station that would broadcast to the Falklands in Spanish. It would be called Radio Atlántico del Sur, or Radio South Atlantic.
I had chums who were down there, or on their way there, who were going to actually be doing the business. And anything I could do to help and support using my Spanish, I was looking forward to it once I knew what was going to happen.
This Ministry of Defence document that I found in Neil French Blake's files says that it had been established from what they call refugee debriefs, I think that means interviews with Falkland Islanders who'd escaped, that the Argentinian troops occupying the islands had got shortwave radios and were listening to foreign radio broadcasts. We also found the 7-point plan for Radio Atlántico del Sur. The top 2 points were his somewhat unconventional philosophy: propaganda equals truth, not lies, and truth is more powerful than lies. It was part of what he called grey propaganda.
What we call grey radio stations. Black and white is white. And grey is you don't actually attribute yourself to anybody, but you appear to be on their side. That's what Radio Atlántico del Sur was.
I'm sure this would have been in his opening meeting when he would have got the whole team together and explained what we were doing, why we'd all been hiked out of our various jobs and brought to this anonymous building in the middle of London.
Well, the sort of chat he gave me was, we are going to get the Falklands back. We are going to make sure that these RGs don't stay there. And, we are going to fight for them. And we're going to tell them that they're not going to win. And we're going to tell them that our boys are coming.
The purpose of the station, as I was told it, was to get across the idea that you're going to lose this in the end because you are up against superior forces with greater knowledge and ability.
Propaganda does not mean telling lies. Propaganda means imparting information that can influence the attitude of an enemy.
And so French Blake devised a slogan, bringing truth to the front. Next they had to decide where to put the radio station. Well, it wasn't going to be anywhere near the South Atlantic, it was actually here in the heart of political London, Westminster. And here was King's Buildings, a fairly anonymous looking building where they would bring military personnel who spoke Spanish, preferably Spanish with some kind of Latin American accent. In the first week of May, this British submarine HMS Conqueror sank the Argentine cruiser the General Belgrano, and the Argentinians attacked HMS Sheffield. The task force was now approaching the Falklands and a land war was imminent. The station needed to get on the air. Argentina has invaded the Falklands. Britain is throwing everything it can at the South Atlantic to get them back. MI6 recommends Neil French Blake as the best man to assemble a propaganda radio station. The plan is to broadcast to the occupying troops to help tip the balance. The Ministry of Defence is all for it. The Foreign Office is against it. The plan comes before a War Cabinet meeting chaired by Margaret Thatcher. And we know all this because these are the minutes of the meeting, and they tell an interesting story. The main business of the War Cabinet was to decide whether to land British troops on the Falklands and fight a land war, and they made that decision. That decision having been made, they moved on to the radio station, and they looked at it in the context of the landing, and they decided that the radio station could have a valuable psychological effect on the garrison and could therefore save British lives. They gave the go-ahead for Radio Atlántico.
Margaret Thatcher looked at it and said, "Do it."
While the top civil servants had been arguing, engineer Jim Warwick had been talking to Neil about how to get the station on the air.
OK, you realise that the Falklands is a long way away and it's over water and there's no bits of wire between here and there. And he said, yes, that's been sorted. Oh, OK, fine. So apparently they've been on to BT, who set up links to a link to Ascension Island, and then that was where the transmitters were. And they set up the link to Ascension Island. It was a shortwave link and it was rubbish. But they also had given us a phone, a direct phone link to Ascension Island, and that was lovely. So first thing I did after we started was switch the feed to the transmitter to using the phone line, because it was a far better signal. And off we went.
That is it. That's the jingle.
On the 19th of May 1982, the very first programme of Radio Atlantique du Sur was sent from the studios in this building in Westminster towards Ascension Island, where it was then put on a transmitter requisitioned from the BBC, and that sent it onwards towards the Falklands and towards Argentina.
And that is how a Royal Navy lieutenant and an RAF squadron leader sounded like this.
Oye, José Miguel, ¿qué tenemos esta noche?
Bien, para esta noche tenemos las noticias,
Los discos,
las crónicas
las dedicaciones
y las pausas sentimentales.
y los astros.
I certainly remember watching the start of the broadcast, and we were able to listen into the repeater station on Ascension Island, so we knew that it was being broadcast, we knew it was going out, and that was quite a feeling.
Was there applause or cheers in the newsroom?
This is Britain. There was music interwoven in that, and messages about people, and I think, was there even a recipe in there somewhere? I mean, there was an idea of it being a sort of a gentle Radio 2 idea, something they'd like to listen to.
But Neil needed someone to give him advice on Argentinian music, and one British man seemed the obvious choice, who only 5 years previously had a massive hit by writing the line, "Don't cry for me, Argentina."
I rang up Tim Rice to ask him for advice on Argentinian music. And then
The Evita man.
Evita, yeah, he's a friend of mine.
Is it?
Yeah.
It was very clear that the aim was never to try and persuade Argentine forces of the merits of the British claim to sovereignty or anything political or diplomatic. It had purely two aims. The first was to persuade Argentine troops to hesitate before firing on British forces. The second one was to persuade Argentine forces of the merits of surrender.
Soon the station would be put to the test. On only its second day of transmission, British troops got ready to land and begin the battle. Radio Atlantico made clear the peace talks were going nowhere.
Las noticias. La primer ministra inglesa, la señora Thatcher, ha dejado a los parlamentarios sin duda alguna que la solución militar es la única opción que existe para solucionar la crisis de las Malvinas.
The station was live on air for 3 hours each night, and later with an added breakfast program. It was a mix of news, music and features, all with a nuanced psychological aim. And it started just in time. The following morning, British troops landed in the Falklands. Radio Atlantica was ready to bring the occupiers of the Falklands what was good news for Britain, but bad news for them.
Nobody was sort of standing on my shoulder saying you should write this or not write that. And it just didn't seem correct, if you like, to report on British losses, because that wasn't our role.
They were very selective in their news, but there was actually, the instruction was actually very clear from Neil French Blake, no lies must be told. So everything was truthful. Of course, it was selective truth.
What your role was to tell the good news about
Yes.
how the war was going.
Yeah, exactly.
But not the bad news.
Yeah.
As the land war started, there were also military updates presented by announcers with Argentine-sounding names, according to scripts I found in Neil French Blake's secret archive. The station's military pundit was called Jaime Montero.
That's it, Jaime Montero.
Jaime Montero.
That was my name.
Who is Jaime Montero?
I was Jaime
You
Montero.
are Jaime Montero.
En cambio, no se ha explicado cómo los aviones Sicaria han podido seguir operando tan efectivamente de esta nave supuestamente tan mal averiada.
And so despite the fact that he was a broadcasting amateur and had zero experience in front of a broadcast microphone, Major Terence Scott of the 14th 20th King's Hussars, a.k.a. Jaime Montero, hit the airwaves of the South Atlantic.
Y es el primer paso a un futuro económico seguro para la Argentina. Y se basa en la fin de la guerra inútil y costosa en las Malvinas. Muchísimas gracias, Jaime.
Terence would seize any opportunity to unnerve young Argentine conscripts.
Los Gurkhas.
Ah, see.
Now, tell us about what you would like the average Argentine conscript on the Falklands to know about the Gurkhas.
We sent down the Queen Elizabeth after the Canberra, etc., after the initial task force had gone. In the QE2 came the Gurkhas. I thought this was a perfect opportunity to create a little uncertainty in the locals' minds. One of the foibles about the Gurkhas is their use of the kukri.
So the kukri was this sort of giant knife, effectively,
which they would take a sheep's head off at one blow.
Con el uso de sus cuchillas curvadas llamado kukris es ya bien conocido. Como es bien sabido, es una tradición con los Gurkhas que una vez desenvainado el kukri tiene que vertir sangre.
I think we did a story about how fierce the Gurkhas were. You don't want to mess with the Gurkhas. Something of those lines.
He came round to the Gurkhas. He said, well, we will emphasise the kukri, the Gurkha knife, and all the little stories about the Gurkhas and all the rest of it, just to try and terrify the buggers.
It's not untrue, but I'm trying to demoralise the opposition who are trying to kill my friends. I was trying to get them to surrender. It might save their life as well as my friends.
Es que todas estas tropas lleguen. Esperemos que así sea. Pero acuérdense que solo la rendición honorable pueden evitar la pérdida innecesaria de vida.
Do you think your station had any effect on morale?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Absolutely, because they were conscripts. Yeah. They weren't professional soldiers.
Of course, it was very important to make the Argentine troops listen by giving them what they wanted to hear. And many wanted to hear the latest football results from back home and how their hero Maradona was getting on. So the station had an audaciously simple plan to get that information.
We had all the telephone books, so we just rang up the press box in the stadium about 2 minutes before the game was due to end and said to them, what's the score at the moment, mate? Oh, thank you very much. We try and keep them talking for the last 2 minutes.
I'd see.
Instead. But the moment the whistle went, bang, bang, we had the score out ahead of every single Argentinian station.
The radio station would try to increase the sense of isolation for the Argentinian soldiers who listened. It had a homely feel and played their favourite pop music, sourced at nearby HMV Oxford Street. Radio Atlántico del Sur even had a soap opera, Los Viejos, the Old Men. Two characters, Pablo and Pancho, chewed the fat about the world as they saw it. I found recordings and one of Neil French Blake's scripts for the Old Men in his archives. In one scene of the soap opera, the old men discussed the latest worrying news for the Argentinian troops occupying the islands and talked up the advantage of surrendering.
It is a sad tale, I must say, and it merely confirms that the poor soldiers in the trenches around Port Stanley are in for a hell of a time when the full march on Port Stanley is unleashed. Certainly if I were there, I would surrender at the first opportunity, because I value my life.
Within a week of landing, the British achieved victory at Goose Green and took enemy troops prisoner. With an idea borrowed from World War II, the names of prisoners of war who were alive and well were read out. It could encourage more to surrender and perhaps persuade their families on the homeland to push for peace.
I'm sure that we had an effect. It's never going to be measurable. And who would have been most affected will always be questionable. I suspect that one of the lasting effects we had was that the families of the soldiers who deployed there will have heard of what we were doing, what we were saying, found it to have been true. When we gave out the names of those who had been taken prisoner and that were therefore safe, they would have been relieved to know that that was so, and that would be good work as far as they were concerned.
Curiously, the Ministry of Defence at the time never actually tried to find out whether anybody in the target audience had ever listened to Radio Atlantico. For instance, they never interviewed any of the many Argentinian prisoners of war. So 40 years on, I decided to try and find out.
I'm going to Buenos Aires to see what an Argentinian veteran thought of Britain's Radio Atlantico del Sur.
Patria sí, colonia no.
In Argentina, the memories are still raw of the battle for what they and Radio Atlantico called the Malvinas. There's a memorial to the conflict in the heart of the capital, Buenos Aires. I met up with an Argentinian veteran to find out what it was like for the listeners of Radio Atlantico del Sur.
Did they like the music?
¿Han gustado la música?
Sí, obvio. Sí, nosotros nos gustaba porque nosotros éramos jóvenes y para nosotros los británicos, los conjuntos, sobre todo los Beatles, fuimos una generación, en algunos casos, que nació con ellos este cambio. Por lo tanto,
se anticipa que los refuerzos de aviones Harrier operarán desde los portaaviones Invencible y Hermes, los cuales en estos momentos deben de estar transportando el número máximo posible de aviones.
Y nosotros sabíamos que era parte de la propaganda y en general pasaban música y pasaban estos anuncios de entregarse a los soldados. Nuestra suposición es que esto estaba hecho desde la isla Ascensión, porque era la base de reaprovisionamiento británico que habían permitido los americanos habilitar ahí.
The fact that Terence Scott was born and raised in Chile was a godsend to Radio Atlantico del Sur, helping them to sound as authentic as possible. But his extended family also helped. Major Tony Valdez Scott was Terence's cousin. He also grew up in Chile and ended up in the same regiment as Terence. He became the editor of the station. Sadly, he died in 2021. And there was another cousin with a Chilean background who did her bit by becoming the only female voice on the station. She was the chief announcer and was known as Mariana Flores. Her tones, like that of a mother, wife or girlfriend, were designed to add to the troops' homesickness. I played Terence a recording of Mariana delivering one of her pausas sentimentali, a sentimental pause.
Se la mandamos a la familia de Alfredo Martínez que vive en Mar del Plata. Amor eterno. Podrá nublarse el sol eternamente. Podrá secarse en un instante el mar. Podrá romperse el eje de la tierra como un débil cristal, pero jamás en mí podrá apagarse la llama de tu amor. Y ahora con una copa de más, por José Vélez.
Tell me you wouldn't be moved by that.
The novice military broadcasters continued. When the British flagship, the aircraft carrier HMS Hermes, arrived near the Falklands with reinforcements, aircraft and helicopters, it was down to Major Terence Scott's alter ego, Jaime Montero, to deliver the news to the Argentinian troops.
Jaime Montero.
Muy buenas noches.
¿Cómo estás tú? Y creo que tienes la situación militar para nosotros.
Sí, lo tengo aquí. La moral de las tropas de la agrupación táctica aumentaba considerablemente con la reciente llegada de los demás aviones Harrier. Comunicado el reportero de la Asociación de Prensa, Martin Cliva, el cual está a bordo del portaavión Hermes. Estos refuerzos han casi duplicado la cantidad de esos aviones de gran eficacia a bordo del grupo táctico, e incluyen la versión especial para combate aire a tierra, el cual será un arma potente en cualquier atentado para reocupar las islas.
Muchísimas gracias a Jaime, y aquí tenemos una dedicación.
One of their broadcasts was based on rumours of Argentinian troops eating local sheep amidst an outbreak of liver fluke, which causes serious diseases.
So we gave them long enough to make sure that enough would have eaten it before we warned them of the dangers of liver fluke. And we then went into some considerable detail. I remember because I particularly enjoy doing that sort of thing, I'm afraid, of the awful symptoms of this disease, and certainly if they'd eaten any of this, they should certainly report sick.
David, that brought back memories for you as well,
Well,
did you?
absolutely. I remember exactly the same story. You know, we worked on it together. I remember writing it up as well, and exactly that angle of, you know, be careful because, you know, don't go around butchering sheep because, you could get all sorts of nasty things.
Sheep really cook it well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have to say too much, you just got to sow the seed. And these people were there to kill, you know, our people, our men, my friends. And they were in defensive positions, and our people were going to have to attack them over open ground. So I felt no inhibitions about undermining their morale. If it saved any of our people, I'd be delighted.
Cheers. And the station would sometimes direct their programming towards the Argentinian mainland, not just the Falklands.
Ahora deseo mandar una poesía de mi parte, o digamos de parte de todas las mujeres argentinas que lamentan estar sin maridos, hijos o novios. Ay, qué trabajo me cuesta quererte como te quiero. Por tu amor me duele el aire, el corazón y el sombrero. ¿Quién me compraría a mí este cintillo que tengo y esta tristeza de hilo blanco para hacer pañuelos? Ay, qué trabajo me cuesta quererte como te quiero.
I remember particularly that we had some sort of competition where a dinner, a candlelit dinner with Mariana Flores, was the, after all this awful business of fighting is over, a candlelit dinner with Mariana Flores was the prize. I don't know that it ever happened, but perhaps there was no response. Exactly.
Neil French Blake wanted to do anything he could to tip the balance of the hostilities, but sometimes his ideas were a little too extreme for his bosses. For example, what he planned to do with a list of Argentinian casualties.
Well, I had a plan, and that was we could ring up quite easily the barracks of the soldiers that had been killed and ask for their nearest of kin's address, and then ring them up and have them on air, live on air, telling them that I'm sorry to tell you your son's been killed, and get their reaction. But they thought that was going a bit too far, so they wouldn't let me do that.
Right.